여기 종이 여기 아궁이 옆에. 아궁이 옆에 있을 텐데.
So did you light the fire yet?
It's we're trying to light it now.
Can you show it? We can't see fully. A little bit. Yeah, very good. Fantastic. Okay, very nice.
You see that?
Yeah.
I can't go far.
You have a nice mask.
Thank you. My daughter made it.
So can you tell, because most people, maybe if someone is watching, they don't really know what you had been planning. Can you tell a little bit about what you're doing?
So okay, so well, David passed. So his passing was really untimely, and this is called halchip peogi. Usually, hello.
Yeah, we hear you.
Yeah, you hear? Okay. Usually, this is done in the first full moon after the Lunar New Year, and so it's kind of like we do this in Korea to anticipate the coming spring and harvest, to pray for a good harvest, and so it's a kind of rebirth ceremony of rebirth, and usually we put like bamboos in it, and it kind of explodes and makes sound, exploding sound. But right now here we just put pine, just for safety reasons, because we're in a yard quite close to the house. So yeah. So
usually it's exploding.
And the bamboos will be exploding, like popping, because bamboos, bamboos have these segments, and each segment is a kind of air container, right?
Yeah.
So when it burns, it explodes.
Wow.
Yeah. So it's kind of spectacular, but I wanted to do that, but I was advised not to.
Yeah, with little kids, that could be quite. Do they fly around at all when it explodes, or not really so much?
The what do you call this? Little no, it won't fly. It won't fly, but these little fire particles fly kind of widely, and when we this is it comes into charcoal. Kids will play with the charcoal. Put them in little canteens, attached to a string, and kids will swing the canteen around, and that will also spread the fire particles around, and even throw it into the air, and that would be also kind of fireworks.
Oh wow!
Like effect, and
so when you take a burning stick, it's almost like it leaves traces also. Then
yeah, exactly. So maybe our neighbors will join soon, and then they'll bring the canteens. Well, they told us, but wife says not to do that. Yeah. So we'll see.
Beautiful fire.
Yeah?
Yeah, no,
Excuse me?
it's nice. It's because it's the middle of the day here, so it's nice to imagine that it's the evening and that a fire is already burning. Maybe it's also because in the process of organizing, day and night have sort of faded into one. Hello.
Right. So yeah, so I wanted to do something for this occasion.
Yeah.
So,
Thanks very, very much for being with us today. And
you're
thanks
welcome.
for dialing in. It's really it's very important. We'll have different people dialing in all day. Now we're going to switch, I think, to Steve Keen. I don't know if he's ready for us. Let me just check. Okay. So we're going to be switching now to Steve Keen, who you can also listen on the stream.
Because we don't know, we know David died of bleeding in the pancreas. He had internal bleeding, and that was the first diagnosis. And then when the autopsy was done in Venice, it's just that they basically detailed the complete breakdown of the physical organs. And David was not an unhealthy man by any stretch of imagination. And I know that for some weeks they were trying to get tested for COVID and they couldn't get tests. This total chaos in the UK was a large part of, he felt unwell. They thought maybe it was COVID. They couldn't get a test because he didn't have the right symptoms, etc., etc. And then finally he has pancreatic failure. And from what I can tell, it's probably COVID that got him. And that's why this is my mask. And I can't put it over the headphones, but I want to make a point. These are my masks. Okay? Let's see how many I've got there. That's one of about 3 or 4 bags we have of them. And why that's the point, in Thailand, when we arrived here, I moved to Thailand because I could live in the UK. I was living in Amsterdam with my partner, Nisa, who's Thai and hasn't lived in Thailand for 25 years, but we moved back over here because Thailand was clearly doing much better in fighting the virus. And when we got here, every day for a month, we'd line up at a local supermarket to purchase one of these packs. I'll put it away again, hang on. So for the princely sum of 40 baht, which is £1, okay, you got 4 of these every day. And that was across the whole of Thailand. So this place could produce its own personal protective equipment, distributed it much more effectively, and COVID has died here, whereas I think David died of COVID in Venice, courtesy of the chaos in the UK. So that's the end of my mouth. I think I'll take this damn thing off because it feels ridiculous. I'll put it up there. Okay, give me my cat eye. So, if I can get a bit of a show of hands, I don't know how I think there is a way of putting your hands up in this thing. If you click on participants, can I get a show of hands of those who've read Debt for the first 5,000 years? A reasonable number, yeah, okay. I'm just going to share my screen here, and I want to show, in terms of continuing on David's work, I want to see people run with the lead that he provided on that front. So I'll just actually go to share my host disabled participant screen showing, and I'm the host. Okay, well, that's news to me. So let's see. Oh, well, actually, I'm not the host. Because there was a hassle with YouTube. I set up this for a 6 p.m. YouTube thing. First of all, Patreon. There was some breach of security for one of the websites I belong to. Passwords were stolen, so Google wouldn't let me start my Prof. Steve Keen email anymore, which is what I control my YouTube site with. And then on top of that, YouTube or Patreon somehow decided that 6 p.m. and say allow screen sharing, because one thing I wanted to do was to show some of David's writings, but also the some Minsky and stuff like that, and have a talk about that, because I mean, in some ways I see this as a bit of a wake for David. And a wake, you talk about what the departed did and what they led you to do. So in many ways, David was part of me developing Minsky software and being able to model monetary dynamics mathematically. And that was the major overlap he and I had, was that he was the historian, the anthropologist, and the writer. And in that sense, I mean, I can write, but I'm the mathematician. So I've just actually asked them to let me enable screen sharing so I can show you what I ended to do. Yeah. So I mean, raise a glass. This is a glass to keep me cool rather than glass to get me drunk. I might go get a tequila after my little treat over here in Thailand is that you don't want to drink wine in Thailand. But actually, I've been told there's Thailand wine. I've got to give it a try shortly with a American guy I met at a shop a couple of days ago. But it's too hot to drink wine, so you drink spirits and tons of ice, and the spirit that I've got into is tequila. So I'm going to get a tequila, what I call a tequila sunset, which is tequila with Coca-Cola in a short while. Yeah, so I'll try once more. Are they allowed screen sharing? Nope. So I can't do anything about it. So let's just have a chat. I mean, are all patrons here, or? Okay, Marty, yeah, and Nigel. And Robin. Just introduce yourselves, and I'll shut up and let's hear a bit from you, because it's a conversation in the spirit of being at a wake around David's corpse, and let's talk him back into life again. So, Robin, you're the top. Actually, no, Claire. I'm going to go with Claire first of all. So, tell us a bit about yourself, Claire.
Okay, my name's Claire Connolly. I'm a researcher at Rebuilding Macroeconomics, and formerly, still presently, a journalist, but made the switch into academia about 2 years ago, and I'm very interested in exploring the policy impacts of data omission and also how knowledge claims are formed. So David's work has obviously been quite central to the research that I've been doing, and he very kindly and completely, undeserved on my part, he for some reason took me under his wing and was incredibly generous professionally and personally, and I'm very sad that he's gone.
Yeah. Marty?
Can you hear me? Because I don't have my headphones on.
Oh, your accent is coming through gorgeously, yeah. So you can keep on going, okay.
All right, you can hear
not only who you are, but where you're from.
Y'all might not understand me. I'm from Northern Ireland, the north of Ireland, as some people refer to it. And David inspired my PhD. That's I first read Debt when I was doing my master's degree. I went back to education as a very mature student, and when I read Debt, I thought I've got to do my PhD on this, and I managed to get to meet David, and I broke all the academic protocols because I brought this with me. I brought the book with me, and I didn't give monkeys. I got him to sign it.
Let's magnify that for a second. Hang on, I'll pin your video so we can actually see it. Yeah, I was going to take a screenshot of that. Hang on a second. If I can't actually share my screen, I'll steal yours. So, okay, so that's cool. Okay.
So, and I'm glad I did, but they always say you shouldn't meet your heroes, and I got to meet David, and he was just so generous, so lovely, and had time for all of because they were mostly PhD students. I got to meet Nathan Tankus, who now seems to have taken over the world.
Nathan's
Twitter.
doing very well, isn't he?
Yeah, he was sitting beside me at the conference that we were at, and we just hit it off, and it was just a lovely atmosphere, and as I say, David was just great. So that's my claim to fame now.
Yeah. I mean, that's the thing about David. I was saying with the little video I recorded with Michael Hudson yesterday or the day before, one of the distinguishing features of David is a complete lack of what we normally call ego. Now, he had a very strong sense of himself, but he was not up himself.
Yeah.
And that's the distinguishing feature. He was just David to everybody who met him. And there was no sense that I'm important. You know, he just was somebody who shared with everybody, which is so hard about it. Robin, I'm going to go through my screen here. You've got to unmute yourself.
I've unmuted myself, thank you.
Yeah.
Right, I think I noticed David over the last few years in various things and seen the odd YouTube clip. And I thought the general arguments, I haven't read either book, but I've sort of read summaries of Debt and Bullshit Jobs were pretty awesome. So I thought he is an interesting person. And also, I got more interested in anthropology in recent years as a way of looking at the human condition that might actually add something. So thinking about lots of things, and then when he sadly died, the news went around in the pagan and magical community to an extent, who'd observed in magic in Madagascar. And in his Twitter, there's the bit where his landlady accused him of practicing black magic.
So that's one up on me. I've never quite copped that. You know, the neoclassicals probably think I'm Beelzebub, but they haven't actually accused me of black magic. Okay.
And so that's how I'd got interested. And then I have bought, but not yet read, a copy of Debt.
Okay.
And I would like to read his book about Madagascar, which is somewhere between ABE Books and me. So lots of interesting things. And then, of course, there's the side spin-off's the wrong word, the side link into economics and the things that you were doing. Because I'd always suspected most economics was bullshit, despite having worked in insurance and mainly for years and years, and even done the odd exam in economics. So I never quite believed it.
The sensible attitude.
And it's very hard to put your finger on why it's wrong, but you know, it's.
I can actually put my entire body on why it's wrong and still have parts of it that I haven't touched.
Indeed, yes.
Another
I think
story,
having found your Patreon.
Once you get in there, I mean, there's so much that's wrong with it. The question is what's right, and that's the shortest answer in the English language. But when you first read it, it seems so plausible, and that's why its adherents fall for it. And I must say, when I was a school student, I swallowed it hook, line, and sinker. The one problem that I had in accepting economics was that I was also doing advanced mathematics at school at the same time, and we had a fabulous economics teacher as well teaching us Rostow's theory of growth, and both of those involved differential equations. And what was puzzling me about economics was the absence of them. Well, I get into the damn discipline and they have no understanding of dynamics, and that's why you just don't find anything about dynamics. But initially, if you fall for the intersecting lines, you know, supply and demand and marginal this and marginal that and so on, it's a plausible, apparently self-consistent story. Unless if you stay at the surface, as you say, Robin, you can't quite put your finger on it because it all seems to be plausible enough and tied together. When you get in there and look at the empirical and the theoretical flaws in the actual logic itself, then it's just, my God, this makes Ptolemy look well thought out.
And I think also those models you just referred to neglect frictions really, and the fact that things don't happen instantly. They completely.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, the whole idea of frictions. I mean, this is when you think about how they reacted to the global financial crisis. And I had this quite a few times, a very angry neoclassical saying to me, "We've modified our models to include financial frictions. What's wrong with you?" I said, "What's wrong with you is fucking frictions. I mean, it's not a friction. It's a bloody banana skin on the pavement. It's not. It's a lubricant in terms of what finance does to the foibles of capitalism. So everything they're framing them, they can't even see anything about frictions delay your return to equilibrium.
Yeah,
that's all it is. Yeah.
So anyway, I I did do a degree in maths, and I then worked in operational research and insurance. But it always struck me as oddly, there were various attempts at various times to build kind of input-output models of the economy.
Yeah.
There were a few floating around when I worked at the National Coal Board, and they're the things that Stafford Beer did down in Chile. But they all seem to die out, I suspect, possibly because propaganda of one kind or another.
I mean, the input-output stuff was actually part of what they call computable general equilibrium models back in the 50s, 60s, and 70s. And like every neoclassical model at that stage was a computable general equilibrium model. And what that meant was they had an input-output table for each country, and they would then produce the production dynamics, not the production statics of the input-output table. But when you had the so-called rational expectations revolution, what you had was the idea about not equilibrium at a point in time, but equilibrium through time. And when they did that, they eliminated the multi-sectoral stuff. It virtually disappeared. There are still plenty of, if you wanted to say what's going to be the impact of like a new tourist resort on a country, then the answer can only be given by a CGE model within economics, because you have to look at the flow-through effects and how will tourism affect forestry and how will that affect mining and so on. So they still exist, but they're backwater stuff. But in fact, you're right, it should be absolutely front and centre. Yeah. Nigel, let's have a bit of a chat with you. Can you unmute yourself?
Yeah, sure. Yeah. So, yeah, I'm an academic at the University of Edinburgh in computer science. And
oh, Nigel, of course we were talking about developing a bit of Minsky together at some point.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So I've done a lot of computational modeling of various systems, over the years. And I started with the brain, which I still think is probably the most complex system that we know about. But there came a point at which, for a variety of reasons, I started looking around for something else to model, and I wanted to do something to do with climate change and kind of the challenges that we're facing. So I looked at climate modeling and thought, there's tons of good people in that. And then I looked at
not in economics, we need you. But anyway, okay.
Yeah, so I'm getting there. So then I looked at ecological modeling and talked to some of the scientists. I talked to scientists at Edinburgh and all of this, and there seemed like good people doing that. And so then I thought, well, if we didn't have this kind of economic system, then we probably wouldn't have this problem. So maybe I should find out about economics. So I went and talked to the economists, and I could not believe what they were doing, because it was like, everybody else, when they build a model, they try and relate it to the world around them, to the thing they're actually looking at. And these economists were just applied mathematicians who were, kind of enjoying proving things about equations that had absolutely nothing to do with the real world, as far as I could see. Anyway, and I started looking for people who were doing. I thought, well, what we need is a model of an economic system that doesn't grow. It doesn't have to grow, because growth is potentially, we can't keep doing that. So it turned out there were some academics in Edinburgh from engineering and chemistry backgrounds who'd been modeling the economy from a physical point of view.
Okay, that's fascinating.
Using system dynamics models. And Jane King and Malcolm Slessor. And so anyway, I got into all of that for a while. But being in academia, you have to get funded. And there's no funding in trying to do good models of economies, as you know, Steve.
Yeah, it all goes into the neoclassicals, and bugger all gets to the non-orthodox thinkers, because we must be the cranks, because we're on the outside criticising the establishment, therefore we're cranks.
Yeah, it's a very interesting situation. Anyway, my connection to David is very tenuous. I mean, I don't really have any connection. I came across him through the bullshit job stuff, and I thought, this was really great. And then I heard about him a little bit about his debt stuff, but I haven't read the book. And a good friend of mine was a PhD student with him for a while, Annabelle Turner. I'm not sure that it was very recent. So it's very tenuous, but since he died, I've heard more about him and read more about him, and really, it really sounds, although I didn't know him during his life or really pay much attention, sounds like it's, it really is a big loss to have.
It is. I mean, David wasn't doing as much of the original research as, say, Michael and Hudson and Cornelia Wunsch were. He did, and I don't know stuff about Madagascar. I must actually get that book myself and have a read, because I've stuck with David's writings in areas which were relevant to me, which were pretty much the debt of the first 5,000 years, and then the bullshit jobs thing. And we had a good rave in my flat in London before he actually wrote the article that led to that. But he didn't do, like, in terms of the stuff you read in depth the first 5,000 years on the history of money in Mesopotamia, in the Sumerian Empire and cuneiforms and so on. That's all originally Cornelia Wunsch's work, also with Michael Hudson. And Cornelia, I mean, it's quite a remarkable experience. Cornelia speaks 13 languages, including ancient Babylonian. And she has a flat which Michael and she purchased near the British Museum so she can go and translate them. And what David did was really read that research by them and then say, I've got to put this into an anthropological framework and communicate it. And that's where the first 5,000 years came from. And like Michael's books and Cornelia's books, particularly the ones in antiquity, they might sell 200-300 copies. David was selling 50, 100,000 copies in Germany alone. And what he did was make their stuff much more accessible. And that's the Douglas Adams side of him, that he can just write this stuff in a way that's fun. And you find yourself being sucked into it for the fun point of view, whereas Michael said yesterday, and he's quite right, he and I are, we go in there a bit like the joke, like the George Foreman and Muhammad Ali of economics. We want to bash the shit out of the other side, and that aggression comes through. David said, this is all very fun here, and let's play through it. And by the end of it, he's completely demolished them by dancing around them and making a laughing stock of them.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, Nigel, we must have a good talk about what was possible to do in the Minsky world as well at some point, because the system dynamics stuff he mentioned, tell us about that? The system dynamics work on...
So I mean, this was, Malcolm's professor was an engineering professor, chemical engineering, and his wife, Jane King, I'm not exactly sure what her background was, but they started modeling, trying to model the economy from the perspective of a physical scientist. So, one of the things they said, that really kind of appealed to me a lot is, if you're a physical scientist and you look at the economy, you say, okay, this is a system for production of goods and services. Okay, so what makes this go round? Well, it's energy. Energy is what makes it go round. And so, that's so they looked at it from, and every resource in the economy is almost unlimited. I mean, if we want more aluminium, we can probably extract it from seawater if we've got enough energy. The one thing that is different from everything else is energy.
Exactly.
And
you can't make it.
I mean, it's the second law of thermodynamics, basically. Yeah, you can't make it, exactly. And so if you start modeling the economy from an energy perspective and a resource perspective, and just forget the money, then you can get some some pretty interesting ideas going. And of course, you have to pay attention to money, but in their conception, money, the role of money is as a way for people to decide what to do with the energy.
Yeah.
And so anyway, there was, they did quite a lot of system dynamic modelings back in the, when was it? It was right after Meadows. So sort of.
Well, that's a long time ago they were doing their work.
Yeah, the sort of 80s into the 90s, and Malcolm died aged about 80 on a Scottish hillside, just keeled over. And so I did some work with Jane and some other people kind of continuing that we've published a little bit about. It's to do with modeling the UK economy and these kinds of perspectives. And I mean, the one thing where I think it really is missing is that actually the money side is important.
Yeah.
Despite dismissing it as a, that's just the way people make decisions. Well, in fact, it matters.
It's why they make decisions.
Yeah.
And that's why they're more important.
Yeah.
Oh, look, if there's any of that work continuing, I'd like to talk about it, because that's what I've built Minsky largely able to do, and that's what I'm working on right now. So I'll have a bit of a chat about that in a short, during the short one. Let's move on and chat. Kathy, you're my next on my list of there. Can you unmute yourself and talk about yourself and whether David's intersected with you?
I feel a bit of an imposter, actually. My background is economics. I think I did banking and finance as an undergrad, and then kind of realised it was all bullshit and decided to do a PhD quite late on in anthropology. I work in international development, so it was the anthropology of development, and was introduced to the work of Mauss and others, and that was all kind of life-changing. And since then have got interested in MMT and very active in the Labour Party, and also within the aid system, very critical of public management, neoliberal public management. So David's work on debt and bullshit jobs just struck a chord immediately, even though I've only read summaries. But I think what most touched me was really having been very involved in the Labour Party in the UK for the last 3 or 4 years, which has been an interesting struggle, was the interventions he made around the anti-Semitism debacle last year.
And total debacle.
At a time when you kind of thought you were going mad, when he made those 2 videos, I just got a lot of kind of, I don't know, it was just really reassuring and confidence. And so when I read about his death, it was just such a tragic circumstance. I was absolutely distraught. But to be honest, I followed your work for a long time. I remember when I first saw you on Hard Talk, and I just thought, oh my God, somebody's talking sense. And then, the first time Corbyn was on, I think, a debate, I'd never heard of him and was just watching the rest of them mouthing off stuff. And then suddenly somebody was talking about things that started to resonate. And through that got interested in modern monetary theory. And I think, Nigel, you post on Richard Murphy's blog, do you occasionally? Yeah. And I'm involved. I've got 4 friends. We meet once a week on a Sunday and kind of started talking Corbynomics, and we're very interested in, how do you start to communicate to Labour activists that there is an alternative, and this continual struggle that even though we had people that were very interested in a different way of doing things, they just can't begin to even articulate anything from the economic sphere very confidently. So that's my kind of big interest. So yeah, I'm just here, and I intend to read all his books, because and I hadn't realised that you'd worked together, so that's fascinating. So I'm dying to hear more about that.
I finally managed to get the sharing worked out here, so I just want to show one thing here. This has been a bit silly, but why not? So let's do that. And this is David and me at a function, Ross Ashcroft in the background there as well, at a function about 5 years ago, where Yanis Varoufakis is supposed to speak. And Yanis and I go back 30 years. We were friends at Sydney University in 1991, and Dianos couldn't make it, and I actually wrote a joking email to him saying maybe I should pretend to be by turning up with a leather jacket with my shirt hanging out, and he said, do it, make it into a meme. So I needed someone to help me get away with it, and I rang David and said, can you help me out? I said, yeah, sure, I'll be there. So we're both, you can't see this is a segment of the photograph. We've both got our leather jackets on and we've both got our shirts hanging out. So yeah, he became a good friend, and this is the thing, you just expected him to be there, and to suddenly not have him was, it was in the middle of a conversation working with Matthias Criselli and Tim Garrett on building energy, and I just, you know what you can do in Zoom, I'm sure some of you have done it already today, you flick over and look at something else, nobody can really tell you're not paying attention to the Zoom screen. Well, I did that, and there's an email from Stacey Hubbard saying David Graeber is dead. Oh, what? We'd spoken 4 or 5 days earlier. Yeah, so it was just devastating, and that was dying in Venice. Yeah. So Kathy, I hope that I've been building Minsky to make it possible to make these sorts of arguments in a way that is very hard for people not to understand. And what I might do, not necessarily now, but I've built a set of Minsky models, and what I'd love to have people doing is using Minsky as a framework to say, look, this is what you believe, let's put it into a framework where it makes sense, where you can look at it and see if what you think happens out of what you believe, and the answer is normally no. It's like the whole argument that you run up government debt. Well, it turns out government debt is an asset swap. It's Stephanie Felton argues, and that's something I didn't myself understand before I built the model of it. So it's the sort of thing which you can actually use as an effective tool if you can get people to pay attention. But the trouble is they normally stick with their own beliefs regardless of what you say.
Loved your podcast discussing your kind of mea culpa on that. That was really interesting because I'd never kind of fully understood why you weren't on board with it. So that was really interesting.
Yeah. Well, it was just I hadn't really thought it through properly. Fundamentally, that's basically it. So, Mark,
Yeah. So can I just say something in response to that? I think it's quite an interesting. MMT is, again something that. It's like, why doesn't everybody get this, But I think I've worked with a lot of sociologists over the last 10 years, and I've come to, I guess the point I'm at is thinking that a lot of people, most of us actually live by stories, not models. And
that's true.
The household budget story is incredibly resonant, because we all experience it every day. And the MMT story, we need a story that is resonant. And we need the models, we need to convince the people who are convinced by that sort of thing. But for most people, I think, what's the story? And that's the thing that's going to make or break it.
Yeah, I'm working.
It's really interesting. In Scotland, I'm actually in Australia at the moment, hiding out from the pandemic.
Whereabouts in Australia are you? Which city?
Oh well, I came on sabbatical to Monash in Melbourne, and fantastic place, loved it. And then the virus hit. And so we got the last flight out from Melbourne out to Adelaide. So we're now holed up in a beach town in just next to Adelaide, and just kind of hanging out until the world gets a handle on this.
Wow.
So anyway, that's yeah. So but up in Scotland, where I've lived for over 20 years, MMT is becoming. Still very slowly, but it's becoming something relevant, because the Scottish independence movement is starting to take on board MMT, because there's been a lot of talk about how is Scotland going to run, an independent Scotland going to run its economy? So it's not to say, this is not to say that it's taken over the Scottish independence movement or anything like that, but it is, it does have some traction. More
That's
than
good. Yeah, I mean, I must take my proverbial hat off to MMT. I've had some fights with people in the area, as you know, but you know, something I simply have to acknowledge. They've managed to get a non-orthodox economic theory into public discourse in a way that has not happened since Keynes. And whatever fights I might have with individuals in them, I've got to take my hat off to them on that front and say congratulations. And now Stephanie Kelton's carrying it on even further. And Stephanie, I mean, I've had fights with some of the personalities. Stephanie is a superb human being and very easy to communicate with and very open. So I'm really delighted that she's the one taking the front running, and also Nathan Tankus for that matter as well. So there's some possibility we'll get a new set of stories where people can actually understand that a household and a government are different things. It's like, you know, Earth and the Sun. The Sun is not a large version of the Earth. And if it was, we'd be dead. So it's partly getting that realisation there are different parts to a system that people need to get in their heads around. Yeah. Gregory, yes, sorry?
Hi, can I come in? Steve Hubbard from Gorleston in England. Hi.
Okay, Steve, yeah.
Hi, Steve King. Good to see you and the others. Yeah, I mean, absolutely. The MMT, I think, is a good way forward. You know, there's Andy Agathangelou, who's with the Transparency Task Force that you're involved with a bit, Steve. And I mean, we're endlessly trying to push that, promote that idea that you know, that a private economy isn't a budget is not the same as a national one, and if just those 2 points could be got across really to the general public, I think first they're not the same, and secondly the granny bank idea, you know, the idea of a granny bank is just wrong. And it's what the chap speaking earlier, whose name I forget now, I apologize. Nigel. But you know, he was saying that it needs a story, but it needs a story based on those two sort of bricks, I think, that start off with it. And, you know, it just goes round and round and round. And what worries me really is that MMT may well have some traction and might take off, and then it'll be sort of corrupted and it'll be a slightly different version of the neoclassical with a few tweaks and variations in it, and you know, everyone will say, oh well, it's done now, we'll forget economics and just go back to this new MMT stroke neoclassical version. That's why we've got the paper on the Transparency Task Force website, trying to get a discussion about all the options, not just MMT versus neoclassical, just sort of try and throw the whole thing up in the air. But anyway, good to chat to you and good to be here and see what's going on again. Cheers.
Have others heard of the Transparency Task Force? Is that?
Yeah.
Okay. Have you took a bit of background on that, Steve?
Yeah, sure. I mean, that's an organisation with well over 1,000 people in it now. A lot of academics, a lot of people from financial services, with a number of projects on the go. One of them is about the straightforward scams that are just happening. And there's a parliamentary all-party committee set up to investigate that. Our leader is the endlessly energetic Andy Agathangelou. Recently met Boris Johnson. And partly on the financial scam side, but also one of the other projects he's got going, which is John Hipperson and I have been promoting, the idea of a discussion, an open dialogue about the various methods, the ways of doing economics. And what we found is reinforced. I mean, when we first met Steve Keen, we must say that I just thought he was just another professor in the field, and they would all have the same fundamental views. Like if you talk to professors of physics or something like that, they all have a kind of a fundamental core, although they may differ at the blue sky limit. Whereas we discovered subsequently that actually there were various versions of this, and you know, the idea of the Transparency Task Force and our role in it was to try and get a much wider debate going on, rather than the idea of there being just neoclassical, which is taught in universities, and we've got university local people that we talk to that we know. We've met decision makers from politics and quite senior people, and there's a view out there that, well, this is all very well and it's all fun and it's all a sort of a side issue, but anyway, let's get down to business. And the idea of just trying to add on MMT, I think, is good, because it breaks the idea that there's only one way of doing it, but there's a danger there that it'll be kind of taken on board and corrupted in such a way that I think it won't produce the results that should be, that come from debunking economics, really, and Steve's sort of foundational ideas.
Well, that's actually, the neoclassicals, I actually regard them as being like the Borg in Star Trek. We will assimilate, okay? They take over any threat and assimilate it, which is what they did to climate change, and what they produced is, if you've read my work on it, a total, absolute catastrophe. But they can claim to cover climate change. If they claim to cover money, one of the dangers for that, then they don't actually have money in their models. So to try to model money, they've got to distort what money is, and then say we're doing MMT, which they can't do, because MMT is fundamentally about the actual nature of actual money, and you have to have double entry bookkeeping, and they're going to stick it in loanable funds. That's what they'll do. But of course, loanable funds is, you can build a model of that in Minsky, which I've done, but it fundamentally is not money. It's money which comes out of a pot, okay? And that is the opposite. Money is created by the fact that the capacity to create assets and liabilities by the government or by banks means you can create money out of the operation of accounting. With loanable funds, you can't do that. You'll enter from a particular bucket into another bucket. And that's what they'll probably try to do. Greg, I'm going to go through everybody here. We all get a chance to say. So, Greg, take it away.
Well, first, I want to give voice again to David Graeber. Talk about several qualities that speak most profoundly to me. One was he was an unfettered individual, and he spoke truth. And when people argued with him, I think they misunderstood his entrenched individuality with ego, as you mentioned earlier, Steve. That wasn't at all the case. He was trying to engage on topics of competence, and he was willing to surrender. If somebody else had another expression or experience, he would go, well, that's damned interesting. So from that perspective, I come from Berkeley, California. I was raised there in the 50s when we were taught in very direct terms that you could be whoever the heck you wanted to be as odd and as strange, because after all, we had an international community. It was extremely inclusive and for the most part, human merit-based. So we weren't restricted to one academic discipline or one business or industry, but just kind of a melting pot world. And along with individuality came another requirement, is you had to be good at it. I mean, you could be a wacko poet, but you better be a good poet. So my translation of these two things comes from my orientation, which is a structuralist. So I am not an expert. That's not my strength. My strength is seeing things in kind of very simple ways. And again, this is how I came to appreciate David's work, that he saw this behavior in the, and found support for it, and realized that behavior of oppression and of control and ownership was just plain wrong. And it was explaining to him the circumstances of our day and through all time. And the same with bullshit jobs. Again, empathetic. We are feeling disempowered from our capacity to add value to our companies or our society. So my structure really is very simple. I think of things in terms of assets, relationships, life cycles, and activity. And I wanted to speak briefly to those because I think it intersects, and will cross back to your work, Steve.
Okay.
That, view asset is, people. You introduced energy as a topic, or joined that discussion and tried to give form to that. And then we look at relationships, which are ownership or trust, or memberships, affinities, those are relationships. And you look at the life cycles, and all of these assets and relationships have their own life cycle. And so part of the nature of change is to say, what activity do we need to do to move state A to state B? And then the other part of that is, if we want to go to state B, we want to make it impossible to go to state Z, because that's, no one wants to be in state Z. And so, I look at the world very simply in this way, and I found resonance to you, Steve, that you were beginning to explain the necessary and missing component of energy as a part of economy. And I think a parallel to that are other forms of maybe abstract economics, which deal with diversity, and that could be biodiversity. And if you add that to machine farming and livestock raising, you end up with a diminished resilience, and that shows up in our lives with a diminished capacity of resilience in populations, and we end up with COVID. And, it is just absolutely not a mystery. It is possible to decompose these things and say, these are levers we can understand. So that's my frame. My value add is that I've applied this over some 40, almost 50 years, hate to admit. But I've been applied it onto, the Mission's Impossible, sort of the Stephen Costner, Kevin Costner's, Field of Dreams, where if you can imagine it, or the Walt Disney maybe is a better example. If you can imagine it, it can happen. And so I've tried to figure out, well, what's that missing space in between these relationships, these assets, these activities that would express itself as, say, disease. So back in 1984, the disease that was obvious to me was diabetes. I mean, closet, nobody really paid much attention. But, in an effort here in the States, I tripled testing in 9 months by focusing on the cause of the lack of testing, which happened to be the physicians. They were not motivated to seek change, but it took a body of support to make that happen. And so, that's been my approach. And so when I look at the unique and rich contribution, not just of David's work, but his method, his dialogue, his engagement, his whimsy, these are very valuable qualities we need to sponsor in our communities. And the more we get up our butt professionally, the farther away we get from the capacity to hear and to act, empathetically, which is what's required.
Yeah, I think that's one thing about David, the bullshit jobs thing. He thinks thoughts others don't confine their minds and not allow themselves to think. Because if you're living in a capitalist economy, both Marxists at one extreme and neoclassicals at the other, the workers must be exploited, so you're not going to get them to do anything which is bullshit. The neoclassicals, they get paid their marginal product, so they can't be doing bullshit. And David says, look, lots of people doing bullshit. And then it goes and explores it. And if I can mention one other person that I'm a great fan of, in the same capacity to think the unthinkable thought, is Blair Fix. I know some of you've we had Blair on the podcast a while ago, but I think my own way of how do we understand the bullshit jobs and capitalism, the hierarchy that Blair talks about explains it, because you have to have a hierarchy to maintain control over a diverse system. And the hierarchy comes with the higher status you get, the more you want people to be doing bullshit to make you feel good. But also there's a lot of antagonism in capitalism to market something rather than consumers having perfect knowledge. You've got to get them to look at your stuff rather than somebody else's. So there's jobs which are all sort of throwing our stuff at you, and people think, well, my stuff is not anything better than here. That comes out as bullshit to those who've actually got to do it. And so I can see, I would love to have a place which could have had David and Blair together to get those minds meeting, but that's not going to happen. Mike Rose. I just have a couple of other comments. One, I wanted to give a shout out to Rebecca Henderson's work, where she talks about the collective risk problem and how the recognition of shared interests and shared risk in particular is obstructed. Remedies are obstructed by free riders. And so we have a lot of free riders or ignored factors, ignored people that could engage and don't engage. And so if I had an ambition for your work and those of others, here joining, is that we would look to a way to make it possible to bring those with capacity off their butt
and into the argument and into the action. And so I think we have a larger responsibility instead of just being right or being informed, but we have to be empathetic about why are these people not in our camp? Why are they not joining the solution? So anyway, so that's the last of my thinking. And thanks for the call. I look forward to hearing from others here, remembering David's work and hearing about their work.
So Mike, over to you now. You've got to unmute yourself. I'll unmute you actually. There you go. All right. Hang on.
Is
yeah,
that?
You're unmuted. Yep.
Am I on? Can you hear me?
Yep. Yes.
Steve, nice to meet you. Finally.
Thank you.
I'm the one non-academic, I guess, on this call today. I did my MBA.
Oh, we've got a few other non-academics here. Yeah.
25 years in finance, and I don't know how you and I met. I found you online somehow. And, oh my goodness, where was he when when Tom Hawken invited me onto the expert panel in 2008? Because I got to meet the ministry people at that point, and I thought, oh my, there's this career of mine that's going nowhere. So I've retired from banking and found your blog and thought, good heavens, this is fantastic. By the way, it's 4 o'clock in the morning here, and
whereabouts are you?
I'm in the Fraser Valley of British Columbia.
Oh my God! Okay, my apologies for the time zone.
Look, if the light's bad and my hair doesn't look right, well, 4 o'clock. I sent you a little text about seigneurage. I've heard this conversation, on your thread several times about MMT, and it needs a story. Well, it's been around for 200, 300 years. It's the same story of Napoleon. It's the same story of Asa-Nex, of the French Revolution. The sovereign has always had the right to produce currency, right? And it's always been unlimited. So I like the idea that the earth is different from the sun and that the households are different from the national economy, but MMT has had its story for centuries. That's always been my argument with Stephanie, is that you're not inventing anything new. It's been around for centuries and centuries.
Yeah, actually on that front, another reference I recommend everybody to have a look at is the work of Christine Desan, D-E-S-A-N. She's a professor of law at Harvard. I met her, about 8 years ago, or 6 years ago, when we had a conference with myself, Randy Ray, Mark Lavoie, and a few others at Harvard talking about money. And she's done some superb work on how the invention of the tally stick was a major cause of a gigantic rate of growth, and at the time, as much as energy constraints would allow it, in the UK, what we would now call the UK economy. So the fact you had when the Romans left, there was sort of chaos left behind. There's the power vacuum and then conflict and then a large amount of effectively subsistence farming for some substantial time. And there was you'd lost. So in a sense, the stuff David talks about, which is how money evolves out of credit, the credit had been eliminated when the Romans left, and you lost that system. And then a particular king, one of the things, multiple kings in England at the time, of course, was about a dozen kings, I think, in different regions. But one of them invented some system like the tally stick, and that particular kingdom expanded dramatically because commerce was enabled by credit, which is what these tally sticks amounted to. So Christine's work has been superb on explaining that, and I really highly recommend it.
Sorry, Steve.
Yeah, at 4 o'clock in the morning, mate. You're allowed to be a bit sleepy.
Keep going. I'll cut you off. I'll jump in again here, and it comes back to me in a second here.
Yeah, it's fine. We'll go to Martin Price. Martin, you're muted and dark at the moment. Are you there? Let's see. Martin, are you there?
My internet pretty bad.
Oh, okay. Oh, just introduce it. We will look at your name as you talk.
Great. Okay. So yeah, I'm a urban researcher, ethnography predominantly, but like Kathy, actually, an economics and finance background, unfortunately. I've done my PhD this year, but next year I've got a project starting which is looking at rethinking municipal finance in Lebanon and Jordan, heavily influenced by David's work, Michael Hudson's work. The idea there is looking at municipalities as somewhere in between, currency creating governments and households from a debt perspective. So to look at how municipal debt is experienced, debt social and moral dimensions, and then looking at how municipalities operate under a cloud of debt. So it's a bit of a new research stream for me, but one very much inspired by David's work and yours too, Steve.
Thank you, thank you. And Tom, another person who's, bring your face, that'd be good, Tom, but whereabouts are you? Hang on, the screen always jumps around in this. Tom Roberts, there we are. Okay, hang on, I'm trying to unmute here and nothing is happening. Unmute audio. Doesn't seem to work. Oh, Tom, when you can, stream Sturlich. Oh, that might be the stream. That's actually the stream is the general celebration for David is looking in and may make some comments at some point. That's the stream. That's okay. Bon Yogno. Hello, that's someone I also can't unmute. Ulysses Lazur. I can't. Hugh James, I can't. And Marcel. Oh, okay, Greg's going to connect by email, that's fine, okay. Yeah, I mean, it's difficult when there's such a small community of original thinkers doing desperately necessary work and one of them goes. And that's what I feel with David, that I was relying upon him existing, the anthropological and the serendipity, the part of his mind which can come up with something like bullshit jobs. He's actually doing something on piracy now. That was the next he was working with a book on pirates. And you never knew what was going to come forward, and you knew it was going to be interesting. And suddenly that's not going to be there anymore. And that's what I find a huge hole in my my expectations of what my future is going to be, which is why, you know, suddenly David's a memory rather than a presence. And that's what I'm going to find. You know, there'll be a unique angle he could have provided that won't be there. And that's a great difficulty. Claire and Marty, I might just give you a quick wrap up because I realised I should have been recording and I wasn't when you guys spoke. So quick 30 seconds each. And then would you like me to show a bit of Minsky and the modelling of money and how to use it? Because that's, if there's anything I'd like people using. I agree with the point about, Nigel's point about stories, but we can build the stories around the models. And if you can get people to sit down and say, look, watch this and see what happens, and it's not what you expect, but you agree with the logic behind it, then that I think is a useful story. So Claire, quickly, yeah?
Hi again, my name's Claire Connolly. I'm a researcher at Rebuilding Macroeconomics, which was in the UK. I'm currently bunkered down in Australia. My research focuses on two separate but sort of interrelated areas, looking at the impact of data emissions on modeling and what that means for building agent-based models, but also for understanding how the real economy operates. And related to that is looking at and examining how knowledge claims are formed in policymaking and comparing, say, the economic field to the other social sciences. And just, Steve, on what you were saying before about the big hole that the loss of David has left in our lives, like to me, it just felt like this year, David's work never been more relevant. And it was like he was finally, I mean, he's had a huge impact over the years. That's not to, you know, in any way invalidate anything that's come before, but it was his time. Like, this was the year that his work was more relevant than at any other time before. And it was a year in which his presence as an academic, as an individual, and as a person, a friend, an ally was needed. And I think that's the thing that I have struggled with the most, is that when that one person goes, yes, we will all try to carry on his work and his legacy, but I think when you lose that personality and that person who doesn't get discouraged in the face of like literally gestures at everything, who never seemed to express frustration or disappointment, and who found a way to keep going in the face of adversity and people telling you that you just can't. I think that's the thing that I have struggled with.
Yeah, I think it's very well said. It is very well said. I might just, before you dive in, Nati, your turn. Tom Roberts is now visible. I'm going to get Tom to talk as well. But Marty, you fill in the gap, and please show the autograph again. I'm sorry about not recording beforehand.
I can't believe you're doing this to me, Steve. It was hard enough to talk the first time. I hate these things. David's work inspired my PhD, is what I was saying earlier. I was doing a master's degree. I decided to go back to university as a mature student, very mature student. And so that inspired me. And this became my Bible. So when I was just, I'd finished my PhD, I'd actually passed my Viva. I was getting out of academia. I managed to escape, and I work in an organization called Housing Rights. So I'm bringing my financial knowledge that I gained to the whole area of housing finance. But I met David at a conference in Birmingham that was organized around debt, the first 5,000 years. And I broke all academic protocol and all the rest of it. And you wanted to see this again. So I got him to sign this for me. And actually didn't give a monkeys. I just thought I might never get the chance to meet. I was out of academia. I might never get the chance to meet him again. And he was absolutely lovely. And I have to say, like yourself, Stephen, I didn't have debunking economics with me for you to, maybe I did get you to sign it. I can't remember. But, you know, it's so lovely when you meet an academic, as you say, they're not up themselves and they'll chat to you, even though you're just like a, you know, a PhD student, you're not going to change the world or anything like that. And when they've got time for you, it makes all the difference in the world. So for everybody that's here, that's still in academia, and you meet PhD students, like, just be like that. It's just, it makes all the difference in the world. So there you go.
Yeah.
Well, as an academic, I would say it's the PhD students who change the world.
That's true. I always tell my students that with PhD students, within a short while of you starting your PhD, you're going to know more about the subject than I do. Because
Steve, you told me that exactly. You told me that, and I didn't believe it. But
it's true, isn't it, though? Okay, you take on your field, you run rings around what I know about it.
Well, in Queen's University in Belfast, I used to love when I gave talks about my PhD, and academics would come up to me afterwards and go, "That can't be right." And I'm like, and then I said, just go read Steve Keen, go read David Graeber, and then come back and talk to me.
Yeah. Tom, can we hand over to you now? The dogs aren't barking as loudly. You know? I've unmuted you. There you go. Yep, that's working. Yep, you're being heard.
Well, I'm one of the people who didn't know David Graeber other than seeing other videos from you talking about him or an interview of him on YouTube. But I wanted to be here to hear what the people who knew him thought of him, remember him.
Yeah.
So,
it's tough.
I think that's it. Here we go. Sorry about that.
There are the dogs.
Yeah.
Yeah.
4 little pit bulls.
Yeah. Oh dear. Okay. Don't do anything dramatic on the screen.
Exactly.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I might. Would it be helpful if we finish up and just quickly showing a bit of Minsky and saying, I'd like you to all. I mean, I know that some people would have downloaded and played with. Nigel, by the way, before I forget, you're in South Australia. Before you leave the country, can you go to Sydney and meet Russell? And Claire, for that matter. But I want you to meet Russell because you almost became part of the Minsky team when you had those students. We couldn't quite organise something, but I'd like you to meet Russell and see what possibilities are there for the future.
Yeah,
He's also a lovely guy.
We do have in our minds to go to Sydney, once the borders are properly open. So yeah, that would be great. Yeah, I think I've got Russell's email address. So
yeah, you would have, and if you can't spot it, just drop me a line and I can pass it on to you.
Sure.
Okay. Well, look, I'll quickly show a bit of Minsky, and then because Nico told me that I was very important to David, and I think it's because I could put this stuff in mathematical form. I mean, he's a great guy, and we're very close friends and so on. But what he seemed to bring was able to put his verbal stuff in a mathematical way, and that's what Minsky does. So I'm going to quickly show my screen and then show you, whereabouts are we? The most complicated money model I've done of MMT, and this is Minsky today versus what it was like 2 or 3 years ago, actually maybe 5 years ago, Nigel, when you and I were talking about your students helping develop it. But we now have the capability of multiple interacting, what I call godly tables, to show financial dynamics. And when I read Stephanie's book, I was going to take some time out and not write anything while I read the book, and then I found that to understand the book, I understood most of the arguments, obviously, but the one about government spending creating money directly was one that I whenever I talked about it, I would say, well, money is created to the extent to which a central bank buys government bonds. But when I put this first of all, I read Stephanie saying that it was just the actual act of a deficit that created money, and then that the central bank is simply an asset swap. Well, I thought, what does that look like in Minsky? So this is what I built very rapidly, and if those of you who haven't used Minsky beforehand, what it adds, first of all, it's a system dynamics program. It's a way of looking at processes of change over time and how feedback effects occur between different parts of a system. But what it does, which is unique in the system dynamics world, is it lets you look at the way the dynamics of money, the way an accountant would through double entry bookkeeping. And what they call the law of assets of accounting is that assets minus liabilities minus equity equals zero. And what Minsky does is let you put up a set of tables showing financial flows between different bank accounts fundamentally, and then each row has to adhere to the rule that the sum of the row must be zero. So the initial conditions must sum to zero across those systems, and if there's lending which is increasing the asset of the loans the bank owns, then there must be lending increasing its liabilities as well, and that's how the banks actually go about creating money. So when I've done plenty of models, but I've looked at the private sector creating money. That's been my focus, my research focus. And I have done some models of government money as well, but this is in the strict differential equation world. But here, when I put the full model of MMT together, I had, of course, taxes taking money out of a bank account and spending putting money in the bank account. And what became obvious is that operations that create money have to operate both on the asset side of the bank and the liability stroke equity side. Okay? That's how you create money, because if you simply have an operation solely on the liability side, you're shuffling away where money is. If you have an operation solely on the asset side, you are changing what assets back the money, but you're not creating any more money. So any operation that creates money will occur on both the asset side and the liability stroke equity side. So you put lending money here, that increases loans, increases deposits. Repayment reduces deposits, reduces loans. Taxing does the same thing, and so does spending. Government spending. So those operations are what create money. Now you look at if you sell bonds, if the government's treasury sells bonds to the financial sector, that is an asset swap. It's not creating money. So the money that buy the bonds must already exist for that to happen, and that money is created in this particular case by the operation of government taxing and government spending. So it's not that the bonds create the money or the central bank purchases. I've got them as zero here. There's money being created by the actual act of the deficit. And then what you do by issuing the bonds is change the form of assets that back that money. And one intriguing thing that came out of doing this is if you're paying interest on bonds, then that's going to increase reserves. Where does it go? It increases the equity of the banking sector. So interest on bonds actually creates money. And in this little simple simulation I've got going here, I've got it set up so that if you look, I'll just take a look at the actual model over here. I've got spending at 32.5% of GDP and tax at 30%. So there's a 2.5% of GDP deficit being run by the government. And if you run it for long enough, I'll just run it for about 20 years worth over here, you find that yes, most of the money is turning up being backed by the bonds, but this interest that's turning up here, the interest on bonds is what's creating the amount of reserves that are there. So even without the taxing and spending, the gap between the two is completely covered by bond sales here. The interest payments are creating additional reserves. Okay? So you get some perspective on the dynamics out of this. Again, Minsky's taught me stuff that I didn't know. Okay? And that's the beauty of it. It enriches your own understanding. And Steve Hubbard and John Ibbotson were hassling me, thanks guys, about what the impact of pensions are. So I want to show this quickly. Imagine you have the workers buying a pension off a non-bank financial institution. So to model that in, well, I've got to create an extra account as a liability here, and I'll call this NBFI, non-bank financial institutions. And then workers are buying a pension, so they're going to have pension buy here, and then I've got to match that. Again, Minsky, make sure I'm doing the right thing over here. I've created, that's good, and I've got the wrong sign there, by the way. I'm going to actually, I'll make a deliberate mistake here. Since I started making one by accident, I'll make it deliberately. And Minsky is telling me that's wrong because you've got two entries there. See, one of them has to be a minus. So I come back over here and type the minus, and now Minsky says, okay, that's all right. But once you've bought the pension, then the NBFIs buy bonds off the banks to provide the cash flow that will pay the pension. So what you have to have here is bond by, and I'll make this by NBFI. So that's, now I've got it the wrong side again. I've got a minus there because you're going to use money that you've now got from the workers to do it. So you've got a negative there. So you've got to match it with a negative somewhere else. And where are you going to buy the bonds from? You're going to buy them from the banks. So you have this here. And now that's correct. But what it's showing is buying bonds destroys money. And this is what Steve and John had worked out for themselves, and they wanted me to check it out. They go, guys, it's got to be wrong. I haven't got time to do it. Oh, shit. Different result to what I expected. And that's, again, the beauty of this tool is a way of you finding out what actually, your own preconceptions can be wrong even if you've got the right foundations. And that's where the models play such an essential role. But now, sort of say, if I have pay pensions, then in this case, you are going to be paying it out of, so this does not pay pensions, interest to NBFIs, because they now own bonds. And I've got to change another table on the, I've got to go back over here and add an extra liability here for the Treasury. And let's see if I can actually whack it in rapidly here. So make room for another liability, because what I now have to have is that there's bonds owned by NBFIs. And I won't keep on going because if I do, I'm going to make a mistake and it's going to take too long and some of you have got to go to bed pretty soon. But this is the beauty of Minsky as a learning framework. It forces you to say, where's the next logical component go? Hey, What have you got here, Miguel? Hey,
Yeah,
great
hey,
mate.
Steve.
I'm going to shut up on the boring stuff and hand over to a cartoonist here.
No, go ahead, go ahead. I was just,
Okay.
I kind of came in.
Yeah, but I'll just finish that. I'll go back to Miguel in a second. You're going to get a gift from Miguel pretty shortly, by the way, which we'll talk about in a moment. I've still got to pull my finger out and get the bloody thing off to Vox to get it published. But Miguel, you know the cartoons I occasionally put up on the website? There's your cartoonist, everybody. So, and Miguel, don't you fucking get the virus, all right?
No.
Keep quiet. Yeah.
Ooh, no, not happening. Well, I can't say not happening. I mean, but you know, I'll do my best.
Well, Miguel, introduce yourself now because I'm delighted you've dropped in here. So take it away, mate.
All right. Hi, I'm Miguel Guerra. I am, as Steve mentioned, I am the cartoonist that works on Funny Money and a lot of the other things that you see. I don't know, what else could I say about myself? That's if you do see me on Twitter, I'm usually joking about a lot of the political situation that's going on back in my country, which is the United States. I don't live in the United States. I live in France now. I think many of you might understand as to why, but given the way that things are going. But yes, I think that's pretty much all I can say.
A little detail, a little cameo. They noticed Susie actually called Susie, and that's because his wife is Susie. And the first time I got to know Miguel was I got a photograph taken by Miguel of Susie reading Debunking Economics on the New York subway.
Yeah.
And then the next thing I got was a cartoon of me as Superman done by Miguel.
Oh yes, that's right. Yeah.
And I realized, holy shit, this is one caliber cartoonist, and this is like Marvel comic stuff. And then we got involved in a rather unfortunately aborted process to build a book on money because I'm just too busy and I let two other people take over the process. Miguel, of course, had the talent. The two others did not in terms of writing. That went nowhere. And now, finally, after a couple of half a decade, I finally thought I've got to actually have a crack at writing this. So I've done the text. Miguel's done the illustrations for the first of 3 volumes. I've written 2. One is done. What I now have to do is get hold of Vox Day, who's the publisher, the book, and we're going to get that produced. And of course, everybody here, all my patrons, get a free copy. And we're going to try to keep it as free as possible. Another one of our patrons, I won't mention his name, but he's paid Miguel what Miguel expected to earn from the book. I'm not going to take any royalties either. So hopefully make it extremely cheap. And then hopefully get a cartoon out that takes the shit out of the New York Federal Reserve's cartoons, which are still perpetuating the barter myth and everything else that David was fighting about. We want to do our own in the reverse direction. So that's another little story, Nigel, that we hope we can help everybody tell with the cartoon book. And that will be, I mentioned about a month's time, that should be available. So.
Excellent. Yeah, I'll as soon as you have it all worked out, I'll announce it on Twitter and let everybody know that it's going to be available through Vox. Also, too, I got to get cracking on the second one too as well, and I got a few other things and going at the same time. If any of you doesn't have anything politics or anything to do with economics, I also do comics for kids too. So if you have any kids, might be something you might enjoy. I have a free comic book on Webtoon. You don't have to pay anything. If you like it, subscribe. It's called Wolf Boy. It's just basically fun, silly stuff. Nothing really all that I guess you could say political or economic or anything. So, and because I know now with COVID and all the things that are going on, we do need time to take our minds off of the serious things at times too. So anyway.
Indeed, yeah. All right, well, look, that's enough for me. I think I've got to let Claire get to bed and Nigel as well. You're not quite as late an hour as her. And Mike, you've got to find a way to revive yourself 4 o'clock in the bloody morning. Get back to bed, mate. So cheers to everybody. Cheers to David. Some great souls have gone this 2020. I'm glad we're all here, and don't anybody else leave.
Yes.
Stay safe, Steve.
Bye all.
Take care, Steve.
Thanks very much.
Everybody.
Thank
you for being here.
All right. I'm going to head out too. I just dropped by. I'm going to be putting up my video where I read an excerpt to David. So I just wanted to pop by and say hello because David meant a lot to me. Anyway, so he really got me to think outside of the traditional box that I was shoved into. And he just he was a genius in the sense of getting us to see the world differently. And so I thought, I usually don't do this kind of stuff. I'm usually kind of hauled away on my Twitter or drawing or something. I'm in my little cave, but I figured that I'd drop by and say hi to everyone and just honor Dave.
Yeah, so that's good. That's a good note to finish on, Matt. I'll put this on Patreon site and I'll make it, of course, as usual, publicly available there. Love to you all. Good night.
Good night.
Much love. Bye, everyone.
Bye.